Our next speaker is Adam Waters. So Adam, he's a director at BFBS and has spoken at a few OA events before. So Adam today is going to share some insights on how you can create your own online brand and carry this narrative through to interview. So Adam, over to you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Real pleasure to be here, everybody. So hopefully you're all big fans of BFBS. We're often otherwise known as things like BFPS or BFPO, but hopefully you are very big, keen enthusiasts about BFBS. And I'm responsible for our academy, our training team, and BFBS Creative, our creative agency business. And I just want to share a few tips about how you can really cut through the noise, particularly on social media, which is even more important in today's world. I just wanted to start just talking a little bit about my career, because I think there are some useful lessons, hopefully. So yes, a little bit about me. So I've been with BFBS about 7 years. And I remember when I was at uni, I wanted to break into the creative industries. And I just had no idea how to do it. I was really jealous of all my friends who knew exactly what role they wanted to get into, and there was a really specific path to doing that. But the problem with the media was it just seemed like this enormously broad and vague industry, and I had no idea how to break into it. And it was really hard. It was really frustrating, and it took quite a long time. And when I speak to people who've recently left the services, it's something I hear a fair bit, where people are in a similar situation. It feels quite ambiguous, breaking into particular industries or careers, and that can be really hard, but hopefully I've got some tips for you. I've worked in the creative industries my whole career, and I've made every single cock-up you could possibly think of. My handiwork has featured in the pages of Private Eye, another cock-up featured on Charlie Brooker's Screen Wipe, and probably my most impressive cock-up was wiping a vast amount of money off the stock market by writing the word million rather than billion in a headline. So hopefully that either means the Officers Association have made a terrible mistake booking me to talk to you, or that stuff will go wrong, you need to try things, and you know what, that's how you learn. So I've kind of got 3 main points I think are my absolute top tips to sort of cut through the noise, get noticed, get that career you want. Basically 3 big headlines. The first is to tell stories, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The second is social media really, really is essential, and particularly LinkedIn, but also Twitter. So I'll share some advice about that, and the importance of plain English. This is something that's really overlooked. But before I go on, I'm just conscious everyone on the call might be doing a lot of listening, and that can be a bit tiring. So I'd really like to hear from someone who currently actually does use social media, maybe LinkedIn, and has found it particularly useful. So I'll just hang on a sec and see if there's anyone who would be willing to share their advice and their story.
Okay, we do have a couple of people with their hands up. So Joe
Brilliant.
Patterson, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Brilliant, thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, so I use social media at the moment, I think, as a part of the transition. So I'm still serving, but my intention is to leave in about 12 months' time. And when I attend events like this, or indeed other functions that are out there, I always use the time after to get on the social medias and to look into people's stories and try to make that connection, so that along the process, little tips and advice that I can get from them, I can utilize when I do make the transition eventually.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And I think there's a really important word there, which is connection. Every job, every work experience, every freelance commission there's a person behind it. And I know that might sound very obvious, but there's always a person behind it, and they're always advertising jobs or opportunities because they want to solve a problem. So it's through these connections and knowing people that you are going to get hired. And using social media after events in particular is a really good shout. So yeah, thank you, brilliant. We had another one, I think, didn't you say, Esme?
Yep. So Paul Blythe, you are now allowed to talk.
The Navy in 2015, built up quite a large network on LinkedIn and started doing some public speaking and meetings for charity events initially, but then moving into the Institute of Directors, and found that certainly through going to these events, you can add them to your LinkedIn, but then you can have webinars and video conference calls with them, and they introduce you to other people who are looking for your skill set. So a first connection leads to a second connection, leads to a coffee or a virtual coffee, and before you know it, you have another job application. So yeah, I found it very useful indeed.
Brilliant. Yeah, there you go. Really fantastic example there. I think you mentioned you like visiting the Institute of Directors. They do a very good sandwich deal at lunch. I like the Institute of Directors. Yeah, great place to meet people. So brilliant. Okay, thank you, folks. That's really useful. We'll come back to you in a bit. I just wanted to talk on the next slide, basically about telling stories. Now, what I mean by this is that, you know, us as humans, we understand the world around us via stories and narratives, not necessarily facts and figures. And we see here this cave painting, you know, it's how we understand each other. And what I think I've noticed is that I do get a lot of CVs from people who are leaving the services. I think because often it's modesty or understanding perhaps the power of their experiences, they're not great at capturing their military career in a really compelling narrative. If anyone has read this book, it's really fascinating, but in it, Yuval talks about storytelling is how humans basically collaborate and understand one another. So when you're thinking about setting up your LinkedIn profile, or when you're applying for a job and you have to write a cover letter or an introductory email, what I see a lot of is people writing stuff like, I don't know, I'm a highly capable leader who can, you know, capable of working in a fast-paced environment or well as an individual. And it's kind of this strange office speak that doesn't really resonate with anyone. But the great thing about having served is that when you apply for jobs, that is something very unique and it will help you stand out. So if you can, in your cover letter, in your introductory note on LinkedIn, immediately hit people with a really compelling narrative or story about the time you've served and what you're looking for now, that is how you will again stand out, and people will understand that immediately. It does take a bit of practice, but what you'll notice is that the best people at cutting through the noise, particularly on social media, are very good at summing up what they've done in a really compelling narrative and a story. On LinkedIn, which I'll come on to, I think that in particular is a really important tool. The great thing about it, of course, is that you can connect with anyone you want. And something I've started doing is that pretty much every morning I will just go through and add, you know, as many people as I can before it tells me off who I think look really interesting. You know, if life was back to normal, I would say that networking is the most important thing. It's pretty much the guaranteed way to get jobs and to find opportunities. It really is who you know. And LinkedIn, I think, in this lockdown can replace that. So as we heard earlier, the tips from the people attending, that it's a really good practice when you attend an event or when there's a company you think look really interesting, go on LinkedIn, add them, you know, send them a message. And people often underestimate how keen people are to help and offer advice and spot opportunities for you. So I'd really strongly recommend you network as much as you can. Networking is absolutely vital. Don't be afraid to connect with people, send messages, ask questions, comment. That can be very powerful. It's worth spending the time to do it. And I think I've choose carefully who you network with, because I think it's very valuable to find the companies or charities or sorts of organizations you would like to work for. And it's great because what you can see in LinkedIn is who works for them, and you can connect with them. You can ask for advice on, you know, I'd love to work there one day. what do I need to know? How can I go about it? And I do think it's worth putting the effort in. Quite a big mistake I see a lot of people make is being very dismissive of social media, seeing it as something quite silly or quite facile. And it's an incredibly powerful tool to help you get hired. It really is very valuable. On my next slide, I've got this kind of framework. Basically, I call it Wilma, and I apologise for my ghastly child's handwriting. But basically, I was thinking about what social media posts always do well with people, and I realised it came down to these particular things. And what I think is, and I'll talk through them, but I think it's worth thinking about which one or two of these could you use, and then start thinking about what content you could post and what updates you can post, because it will help get people's interest. So the first one is wow, and what I mean by that is behind the scenes, surprising information, powerful stories, and I think that's something you guys can do very effectively. When it comes to interesting, people want to see how stuff works that they don't understand. Your compelling backstory, things that are quite surprising to people perhaps. Laugh is an obvious one, no surprise. Funny stuff does well on social media, that can cut through. Motivational stuff. We've all probably got a friend, if you use social media, who likes posting motivational quotes all the time on social media, and I don't necessarily mean that. But I think you will all have a motivational story to tell and an interesting backstory, and people want to hear about that. And the final one is people really only respond to stuff on social media that they agree with. So in its most simple terms, it's stuff that, of the service they follow and their political views that they follow. So why this is important is you could use this to create a discussion. I found a very simple way to start off a big debate on social media is to say that whenever you have a cream tea, you of course always put jam first on your scone. People from Devon insist on putting their cream first. Now, for some reason, that drives people absolutely mad and they all pile it and want to comment. But think about starting a discussion. Think about who the people who might be following you are and what they might agree with. People won't tend to connect with people or follow people who don't kind of support their worldview, and that could be a little bit tricky. But this kind of framework generally is the sort of stuff people will respond well to on social media, and it's worth thinking about. And if the content you're planning doesn't fall into one of those brackets, it probably won't do very well. Now, I don't know if anyone here are a sort of grammar pedant. So you like going to, if you see a restaurant menu and it's missing apostrophes, you very enthusiastically circle them. There's a lot of grammar pedants out there, which is fine. But what I notice is that there's not as much a focus on plain English. And this is actually, I think, the art of effective communication and the effectively using LinkedIn. And when we think about our careers and business, people very quickly lapse into this strange formal business speak. And no one speaks that way or enjoys it that way. So having a real focus on simple, plain English, particularly if you are speaking about your military experience, because most people in the civilian world won't understand a lot of what you're talking about. So it's really important to test out the way you describe your experience on people who have no military knowledge and check they can get it. This is really the truth, that a lot of people talk bollocks about their careers, and it's almost as if the more corporate language they can use, they think that makes them sound more and more impressive, and actually the reverse is true. So as I said earlier, almost every application I get, it says something like, I'm highly effective at working in a team and as an individual. Well, yeah, okay, everyone does. So I cannot stress enough just how important it is to focus on plain English. This is the sort of military gobbledygook. It's very, very important to not use. I believe what this means was being in charge of a ship or something. Has anyone, let's go back to the crowd, because again, I've been talking for too long. Come on, hit me with some really classic examples of military or corporate gobbledygook you've heard.
Fantastic. James Hancock.
James, come on, let's hear it.
What you say is for me revelatory, because for some 2 years, having done the career transition workshop, I understood that there was a code to CVs, narratives, and the one thing you had to do was write in this incredibly annoying corporate language. Years, and I'm just reaching for my career transition workshop, very thick document, and it's full. I can't quote it. I'm just trying to find the pages, but it's full of narratives that are a load of gobbledygook. And the revelatory thing for me was only about a week ago, which is almost too late, but it's never too late. Someone introduced me to Simon Sinek, and I don't know if
yes.
him, but this idea of actually trying to describe very simply what kind of person you are, what kind of things you do well, is what I think it's all about. And I haven't given you the quote, I'm afraid, but
yeah, that's quite all right.
If anyone reaches for the career transition workshop, right job booklet, it's full of example CVs, which are full of corporate language, and they do nothing for me. And I really thought that's what people wanted.
I mean, I'm really pleased. Well, I'm pleased to hear this makes sense to you. I'm really not pleased to hear that that's the sort of stuff that's being told to people leaving the services. And I think the most telling thing for me is that no one goes home and enjoys speaking in formal corporate gobbledygook, or watches Netflix series where the art of brilliant writing is to fill it with as much nonsense as possible. It really, I cannot stress it enough, and it's a real disappointment that the focus on plain English isn't there. And I think some people feel like the more they dress up what they do in this quite pompous language, it makes them seem more impressive. And actually businesses do this a lot as well. So this is why, so I've got this creative agency company, and basically I would say a lot of what we do is chopping effective at tactical delivery in the operational arena language into I was in command of a ship. That's the art of keeping things simple. And it is actually a little bit tricky. So I'd really recommend that book, actually, The Oxford Guide to Plain English. It's really good, but certainly avoid corporate or military jargon, particularly military jargon, because when you've lived in that world for a long time, and it's not a criticism, every industry has its jargon, but it's actually quite hard to spot when you've lived in that world for quite a long time. So that's why I'd really recommend trying it out on someone who has no knowledge of the military. And this actually sort of leads me on to my next slide, actually, because what I want to do is to share with you some absolutely top secret strap level 3 information. One is that people like plain English and corporate gobbledygook is nonsense and don't use it. The other is that you don't have to go into a career in finance or in consulting. So what I've found a lot of is that when people, particularly officers, are leaving the military, they are basically told, right, do you want to go into project management, finance or consulting? Now, there's nothing wrong with those industries, and for a lot of people that will work really well. But what I find is, when I'm giving these talks, is that there's probably, I don't know, 1 in 10 of you who are thinking, God, that just sounds awful. I do not want to do that. It's absolutely not for me. And the thing about working in the creative industries is that people often think that equals penury. It's a choice between getting paid bucket loads of cash in consulting or living life as a tortured artist. And I'm pleased to say that's not true. You can go on to have an incredibly thriving career in the creative industries, that your skills are incredibly relevant to the creative industries. We've hired quite a lot of service leavers, as you might imagine, and they're incredibly valuable. And we actually ran a program to get service leavers into location manager roles for the film industry. And it really is incredibly relevant. So for those, I would say maybe a minority, I don't know, but for those of you who are thinking about your careers and actually would like to do something creative, who aren't turned on by the world of, you know, finance or consulting, well, I've got good news. You can absolutely do it. And at the end, I will share my contact details and some advice on that. Now, the next thing's a video. Esme, why don't we give it a go? And if it starts buffering, then we'll bin it. The BFBS Academy is basically our training program, and we've been running an HNC in creative media production for the last 4 years to get service leavers into the creative industries. Now, what we're actually doing from next year is switching to LCAS funded, shorter, very targeted creative courses to get service leavers into the creative industries. And so what I would suggest is if you are interested in working in the creative industries, is drop me an email. There it is. Or of course, if you have any other questions and I can help, of course, send me an email. But particularly if you are interested in the BFBS Academy, please do email me. And just above that is my Twitter handle. You're very welcome to follow me on there. Do be very careful, because there is another Adam Waters out there who's this enormously fat American bloke who lost loads of weight, and he keeps posing in his pants online. And the annoying thing about this Adam Waters is that he's better at social media than I am. So every new social network, he gets on there first. So that's why I have this quite convoluted handle. And please do follow the right one if you're on there. But really at this point, that's it from me. I think the key to all this stuff is it's actually far simpler than it might at first appear. But I'd be very welcome to answer any questions if anyone has them. But I do really encourage you to send me a note or add me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to help, offer any guidance I can on employment. That's what BFBS is there to do. I hope that was useful. Bit of a quick run through. But yes, if anyone has any questions, now's your time.
It's Fiona here. Could I just make a very quick point, Esme, Adam? I hope that's okay. I just wouldn't, sorry, I couldn't emphasise more what you said about, you know, the plain English. And certainly when my colleagues and I see CVs, sometimes we're absolutely bamboozled by what we read. And I often say to the person, I have no idea what this means. So definitely, you know, keep it in clear, plain, simple English, not sort of convoluted, tortured stuff, because I think Lisa said earlier on, somebody's going to spend only a few seconds scanning your CV, so they must make sure that you must make sure that people can understand it.
There you go. Yeah, clearly, yeah, I'm on the right track then. That's good. Good to hear you're backing me up there, Fiona. And actually, that's a really good point about skimming stuff. That's again why you really want to capture people's attention when you are writing that opening paragraph in the cover letter and the CV. It's so vital. But the brilliant thing you all have is a unique backstory, which will stand out in the stack of CVs. So use it, be shameless, you know, milk it for all it's worth, go for it. Yeah, any questions?
Yes, Adam, we do. So somebody is just wondering if you could touch on creating an online presence through a combination of social media outlets. So for example, the likes of Instagram and Twitter, and how this may or may not support your LinkedIn profile.
Of course, yeah, really good question, Georgia. I think first of all, it's important to state that when you apply for a job, pretty much every organisation will have a look at what your online presence. So we have actually turned people down for jobs because they interviewed really well, and then we've gone onto their social media and it's full of wildly inappropriate stuff. So if you do like to spend your weekend going on mad drugs binges, that's fine, but just don't put it on Instagram on a public account. So you want to think, what is your general online presence saying about you? Now, if you were a keen photographer, and I mean, I'm making this up, and you wanted to set up, say, a wedding photo business, well, actually, of course, your Instagram, your LinkedIn all play a part in that online message of what you want to get across. And if you wanted to work in social media, obviously you'd want to be able to show that you are active on pretty much all of them. But my big number one tick, and in fact, Jay, I've seen you just asked a question about what if you have no online presence apart from LinkedIn? Well, perfect timing, actually. My biggest tip, though, would be just to focus on one social network and do it really, really well for work purposes. So if you only have LinkedIn, that is absolutely fine. That is not a problem at all. But I certainly do think LinkedIn is worth putting the effort into. But it's totally fine to have personal accounts that have nothing to do with your work, but just check the privacy settings. I would not make them visible to the public. I would just double check they're locked down. So I hope that's helpful, but just a useful exercise can be Googling yourself, and this is how I found American Adam Waters, and just seeing what comes up. What impression does that give? Now let's have a look. Darren, in fact, Darren, you're sort of asking about this. Do they use a service provider to check for online presence? And can we check this out to investigate our own online presence? So pretty much it will be done by the company themselves. So for instance, we will just have a quick Google, basically. We don't use anything particularly fancy. I think some really big companies, it will be a function of HR to search, but then as far as I know, they're not using any sort of super duper tools to go into your, they can't break the privacy settings. So basically, yeah, just check your privacy settings, think about what image it gives off, and yeah, just Google yourself. But what I would suggest doing is, to get a bit technical, is Google yourself when you're not logged into Google, if that makes sense. Because then it will give you a bit more of a vanilla search result. Stag do pics on Facebook, yes, that is quite a common one. And now, of course, people go on stag do's and have fun, that's not a problem. The other thing I see a lot of people getting caught out by, to get very specific, is if they use Twitter, their likes are public. And if you have a look at Ted Cruz Twitter likes, you'll see a particularly good example of how you can get caught out.
Thanks, Adam. I would just ask anyone to follow up with you privately if they did have any questions, if that's okay. I recommend everybody follows you on LinkedIn. Your 1 minute video posts each day with some advice and some positivity. I think they're excellent. So I really do, as I say, recommend that people add you on LinkedIn.
What a plug. Thank you very much. Farewell. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye. Bye.